Being alone can give you ample opportunity to have some quiet time and work on your inner peace. But when you hear some creaks in the floorboards of your house, those feelings quickly disappear. Here are some of the scariest home alone stories you've probably never heard of. Number 1. Noises in the old house. There was a homeless guy that walked around my neighborhood when I was 11, and he loved to talk a lot. Everyone was cool with him till he acted funny toward a neighbor one day, and this prompted the neighbor to call the cops to deal with him. That was when we found out that he was suffering from an undiagnosed medical illness, and after that incident, he wasn't seen on the streets again. Once when I was home alone, my brothers were out and my parents were on vacation. I was testing the limits of my new amplifier and playing my guitar quite loudly. I heard some sounds coming from my old house, but I ignored them and kept playing. That was until I heard a loud thud and a horrible scream. Assuming there was an intruder in the house, I turned off all the lights, hid, and kept my mouth shut. I stayed in hiding for 2 hours, sobbing quietly, before I mustered the courage to sneak out and go over to the house phone. I called the emergency number, and officers soon arrived at the house. They listened while I described what happened, and then they told me they had contacted my parents and proceeded to search the house. After a few minutes, officers came and took me out to the living room, telling me not to use the main bathroom if I needed to go, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I snuck into the bathroom. That could have well been the biggest mistake of my life, because to my utter terror, the body of the homeless man was hanging by his neck. I stood there frozen for like 5 seconds, and then ran back to the officers with tears running freely down my cheeks. Number 2, open up. When I was 13, I was babysitting for a family in the neighborhood, and one night when I was getting the boys ready for bed, there was a knock on the front door. I was immediately on high alert, and this was the period before smartphones. I knew it couldn't be the parents because they usually came through the backyard. I went to the door and looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. I walked away from the door because I wasn't just about to open it just to check if I was wrong. About 30 minutes later, I heard another knock on the door. I walked towards it and looked through the peephole, but someone was covering it. Then a deep voice said, "Let me in," and my blood immediately ran cold. I initially panicked but had to stay calm for the boys. I went around locking all the doors and windows in the house. Then I told the boys, we'll be playing a game of hide and seek. Took them to the bathroom, placed them in the bathtub and closed the curtains. I locked the door to the bathroom and told them to stay quiet till I return. The person at the door was banging away with their fists. With bizarre scenarios running through my mind, I picked up the house phone to call the cops. And that was when my older cousin popped his grinning face in the window. I was so mad, but had to play it off. I counted to 10 and went to get the boys. I've never felt panic like this in all my life. Number 3, creepy watcher. Back when I was a teenager, I was home alone, asleep on the couch when I heard the back door open. I thought it was my dad, but listening to the person walk around the house made me realize it wasn't him. I lifted myself quietly to have a look, and I saw a guy standing in the kitchen, his back to me. I realized I knew the person. It was a guy I met briefly the previous day. He had made some nasty comments about me, and it was kind of creepy. I laid back down, pretending to sleep, and praying that he doesn't notice me. But he eventually did. He walked over to the couch and stood over it, looking down at me. He stood there and watched me sleep for what felt like an eternity. Then luckily, a car drove by and this spooked him. He ran out the back door right after. The car passed, and as soon as he did, I immediately jumped off the couch, ran to the door and locked it. Being a kid, I didn't know what else to do, so I waited for my brother and dad to come home. When they eventually came home, I told them about the incident and my brother said he'll sort it out. He went over to the house the guy was staying, with the mind to beat him up, but the people housing him told my brother he'd left in a hurry, but wouldn't let my brother check the house. I never saw the guy again after this incident. Number 4, wrong house. My house is located on a main street, so it's always busy with people coming and going. This particular day, I answered the front door for a delivery, left it unlocked, and continued with what I was previously doing. Later in the day when it was getting dark, I was upstairs in my bedroom, when I heard the front door open. I first assumed it was my mom coming home from work, since she always came home around this time, but it wasn't. The first sign was the fact that I couldn't hear the jingling of her keys. She had a ridiculous number of keys in her bunch that you could hear them jingling over a mile away, and she was always struggling with them whenever she came through the door. The second sign was the fact that the living room door didn't open. Whenever my mom came home, she always opened the living room door to greet all 3 dogs, who coincidentally hadn't made a sound. The last sign that made me conclude it wasn't my mom was the sound of very slow and careful steps coming up the stairs. They sounded quite heavy and were in no way like the sound my petite mom made when coming up the stairs. This made my blood run cold, and I laid fear-stricken in bed, unable to move. Then, the head of a big man appeared through my doorway, and I could see he was just as shocked to see me as I was shocked to see him. He immediately blurted, "Sorry, wrong house," before bolting down the steps and going out the door. As soon as I heard the door shut, I hauled myself down the stairs and locked the front door faster than I'd ever done anything in my life. Number 5, unseen voices. Once when I was 7, I was home alone, sitting on one of the stools at the breakfast bar counter and watching TV, when I heard talking inside the house, specifically coming from the basement. The stairs down to the basement were just after the kitchen, and we would usually leave the old wind door open so that the cool air from the basement would come up to the house, especially during the hot summer months. The house was a bit old and the architecture was weird and ancient. As a little kid, I didn't like going down to the basement alone, so when I heard the voices, I turned off the TV on the counter, because I initially thought the voices were coming from there, but they weren't. I can make out the voices better now. It sounded like 2 men talking in a low but normal tone. I quietly went towards the basement door and silently turned my ear to listen to the conversation between the 2 men. The voices became even clearer, and I could hear the shuffle of feet and the sounds of footsteps on the unfinished floor of the basement. At this point, I became too scared to just stand there and do nothing. I grabbed the extra long kitchen phone and ran out a side door. I took some extra steps towards the corner of the house and dialed the emergency number. I stood with the side door in my view until the cop arrived about 10 minutes later. They entered the house and proceeded to check the basement, and then the whole house. But they couldn't find anything suspicious, nor did they find anyone in the basement. There was no one there, but I'm sure those voices weren't in my head.